Do you believe art can change the world? So do I. On this show, we meet artists whose work is doing just that. Welcome to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. What if? What if you can write novels with difficult, challenging emotions, all while embracing joy? My guest today is Holly Ringland. As the best-selling novelist of The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart and The Seven Skins of Esther Wilding, she makes it look so easy. For as long as she can remember, Holly knew that she was a writer. But from the age of 14 to the age of 34, she didn't write. Fear caused her to disconnect from her creative self. Her nonfiction book, The House That Joy Built, is both an explanation of how that fear stopped her and how she found her way back to creativity. Holly has experienced difficult things in her life, trauma, violence, but she creates from a place of joy. The creativity is the joy. This book shares her personal toolkit for addressing all the self-doubt, the inner critic that convinced her that she wasn't good enough to be a writer. It also shares a few gentle nudges for anyone who would like to reconnect and find their way back to their creative home. What if? You want to know how you can really help me keep this show going? Follow me on your favorite listening app. So easy, right? And if you really want to give the show a boost, leave me a 5-star rating or review. Hi, Holly. I am so glad that you're on Art Heals All Wounds today. We're going to talk about your new book, The House That Joy Built.
I'm so happy to be here, Pam. Thank you so much for having me.
Well, so you've written 2 best-selling novels, and The House That Joy Built is your first work of nonfiction.
That's right, yeah.
Now, this book is like the most amazing creativity how-to. You could even say it's a writing how-to, but you make it much more universal than that.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'm so curious to know, when did you decide to write this book? after sort of maybe defining yourself as a novelist, or maybe you didn't, but when did you decide to write this book?
It was, yes. So the absolute honest answer is I have an incredible publisher in Australia. Her name is Catherine Milne, and she and I have worked on my 2 novels together. She has been on book tour with me while I've been promoting each of those novels as they've come out. And to both my absolute bewilderment, and if she was sitting right beside me, she would interrupt and say, I was not bewildered, but I was certainly moved by, I know her this well, this is what she would say. And she would say, I was not surprised because I bet on both of Holly's novels, but I have been deeply moved to see how readers have responded to her fiction. Wow. So when she has been with me on the book tours for The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart and The Seven Skins of Esther Wilding, she has been by my side when I have met readers who have waited in the book signing lines to speak with me, and I have had the deep honor of A, even having a book signing line, and B, that the people that wait in the book signing lines are so open and wholehearted with me once we meet. And the questions that I have gotten most often during these moments of connectivity with readers for both Alice and Esther's story have been questions of, how do I do what Alice and Esther have done? How do I do what you have done, Holly, writing fiction from such a place of all the challenges that you've talked about that have stopped you? So Catherine, as kind of my right-hand woman, is like this magical force in the background that's absorbing all of these interactions. And we also happen to really love each other and be really good friends. So I forget when we are together, because we are so close, that she has this incredible publisher's sixth sense. And I made the silly mistake of forgetting about Catherine's sixth sense in summer in Australia, 2023, which is the Northern Hemisphere's winter. And Catherine and I were together where I am based on Bundjalung country in the southeast corner of Queensland, just for everyone who's listening with us. And I'm near the Pacific Ocean. I have the huge privilege of being and living near the ocean. So Catherine was up from Sydney staying with me. You know, I'm in between. I've finally put the publicity for Esther Wilding to bed. We're together. I've fallen into the false sense of security that I'm with one of my closest friends. We're having a champagne because we're together. It's summer. We're looking at the sea. And Pam, she has these amazing blue eyes. And when she sets them on you, you have nowhere to hide. And so out of nowhere, we were just chit-chatting. And I was like Bambi, just in this innocent conversation, chit-chatting about just some amazing responses. Women had been tattooed with Esther's story on their skin, Alice's
Wow.
story on their skin. Women had done paintings with symbols of Esther's story. And it's that, like, it just I'm covered in goosebumps just talking about it. So Catherine and I were enjoying that. And she sets the eyes on me, Pam. And she was like, there's a nonfiction book in you to answer their questions. And when it's a little bit like being struck by emotional lightning when Catherine Milne does that to you. And so I was not the genius that thought maybe I might have something to offer in a nonfiction way to answer the questions that I've been asked for nearly 8 years by readers, that really comes from the center of all of our souls. That was Catherine's genius.
Mm.
And she said, I think you have something to say about this. And it was entirely because of her belief in me that I accepted the personal challenge of, do you think you could write it in about 3 months? Mad, absolutely mad. And so I wrote about this in the opening chapters of The House That Joy Built, that the way I went into it was asking, what if? My whole brain was screaming, I can't do this. I can't write this in 3 months. Catherine's mad. Catherine knows nothing. The inner critic just was like pulling out every lie possible. And so instead, I just thought, I'm going to give it a try. And there's so much in my brain that is convincing that I can't. But what if I can?
Mm.
And so that is how it exists.
Wow. Well, that leads me into a lot of my questions, but I do just want to stop and say that I am currently reading The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, and I really think you need the award for the best opening hook ever,
Oh,
ever, ever in a
oh, Pam,
novel.
thank you.
And it just keeps getting better from there. But when you read that first sentence, you will not be putting that book down. It's amazing.
It was, over the year, thank you. Let me just say that I am never not deeply moved. That, like, my arms are a little bit shaky hearing that. Thank you so much. Hand on my heart. Um, people, artists talk sometimes, they describe this moment of download in creativity. People will call it download, or they will call it like the come to God moment, or the, different ways of talking about or framing an experience in creative expression, where it really feels like something comes from a place in you that you've never met before.
Mm.
And, I think sort of way, way back in maybe one of her very first TED Talks that's coming back to my mind, Elizabeth Gilbert, it might have even been pre-Eat, Pray, Love days. I'm not 100%, but it was ages and ages and ages ago. And she talked about daemons sort of coming and creativity. That's coming to mind as we're talking. So the point being that there's a lot of ways that we talk about this experience that I'm sure you and so many of whoever's joining us today has an awareness and familiarity of, where something comes to us, we don't know where it comes from, and we kind of sit back afterwards and think, what just happened? What is that? Because we're out of our front controlling brain somehow. And that first sentence is, I have talked about it so often because it's true the way it came to me. And I'm really careful and mindful not to get caught up in my own storytelling about that moment, so that I don't mythologize it, because the way it happened was magic enough. And just briefly to share with you how that line came to be. It was 2014. It was mid-year 2014. I was deeply bereaved. I was grieving the death of a family member that was unexpected. He got very sick, and within a couple of weeks, I was at his bedside as he died in hospital. And he was one of my biggest champions. I hadn't written a novel at that point, but he knew that storytelling and writing was all I knew about myself that had never changed throughout my life. So his death was, of course, a massive grief. And as we all know, grief is universal and personal. It has its own way with us. We can be fine and we can be grocery shopping, and then our knees are giving out over the broccoli. We're at home, we are fine, and we walk up the stairs and just get hit by a memory and we're on the ground. And it was one of those days. I was home alone. My beautiful partner, Sam, was at work. I was in Manchester in England at the time. And I was walking up the stairs. We were in a 2-story house. I was walking up the staircase, and I had the moment where my knees buckled. And what came in the wave of grief was not just grieving the loss of love, it was the absolute rage that I was not writing, that I was confronting years of fear, that in the wake of how clarifying that death was. Fear is so boring, because when it comes to creative expression, all it does is tell us to stop. It's not nuanced. It doesn't sort of give us textured ideas and ways of how we could approach what we want to create. It is so boring. It just says don't. And I had listened to that for years, feeling helpless to stop myself from being governed by the force of that small keeping stop. So in that leveling moment of grief where my knees gave out and feeling all of that rage, I went into my office and I sat down, and I had done absolutely everything right to be a, quote, writer leading up to this moment, Pam. I had read somewhere that Hemingway, why I would want to emulate Hemingway, I don't know. Genius of language as he was, but perhaps the misogyny is like, let's drop, you know. So Hemingway apparently wrote in a moleskin notebook. So, of course, I had gone out to the stationery shops, hadn't I? Because a legal pad wouldn't do. It had to be a 40,000 pound notebook with like the creamy pages. I'd read, you know, my beloved Bronte sisters, our beloved Bronte sisters, they wrote with quills and inks and fountain pens. So I went out and bought my first fountain pen, having never used one before in my entire life. I was 34 years old. I wore more of the ink than went on the page trying to put the cartridges in. Nevertheless, I had all of the things that I thought that I needed to be a writer, and I couldn't write. I was just choked by layers and layers and layers of years and years and years of fear that came from many places. And on this grief-stricken day, I went into my office. I was rageful. I was hot with it. I was so agitated. And in my fury, I said to myself, for once in your life, in the last 10 years of your life, could you please not listen to all of the reasons why you are not good enough and not smart enough and not worthy enough, and you are surely going to fail and insult the very trees that have been cut down to make the paper on which you are going to try and write something? Can you just not listen to that for 10 minutes and see what happens? And I took the lid off my moleskin pen. I looked out the window of my office at the line of silver birch trees in our northern backyard. And the noise in my mind turned to static. And it was like I heard myself narrate, and I watched my hand write on the page. In the weatherboard house at the end of the lane, 9-year-old Alice Hart sat at her desk by the window and dreamed of ways to set her father on fire. And that was it, Pam. I dropped my pen, and I hope everyone will forgive me for relaying the truth of the moment. But I was the woman alone in her house who dropped her pen, kind of bellowed, "Holy fuck," and then sat there and thought, I think this is something.
Yes. And I don't want to veer into making this a show about the lost flowers of Alice Hart, because you have another book that we're talking about. But I will say what's brilliant about that line is that it does not prepare you for the complete good intentions behind our protagonist. It's really a great way to kind of shake us up. But so what's interesting about what you just said is that I think I had the question I wanted to ask you was, how did fear and grief bring you to this moment where you reconnected with your creativity? But what I'm understanding now is that the grief and the rage were the antidote to fear. It wasn't like fear also, I mean, that's what came before, but like really that rage that is a part of grief, that is often a part of grief, is what really became out and was more powerful than that fear.
And that, telling you that story about where the first line of Alice comes from is twofold, because it is speaking to the first line of what was my first ever novel that I've ever written, start to finish, in my life. But in that moment is the seed from which the house that Joy built, my nonfiction, grows.
Right. Yeah. Well, so for people who are going to go read The House That Joy Built, I do want to talk to you a little bit about this idea that you were born a creative person. You loved to write as a young girl. And at some point, the way I wrote it down or thought about it was you became disconnected from that creativity, and you're talking about fear and trauma and things like that. But is that the right word, that you became disconnected, or that it was just so heavily suppressed?
I think what feels truest to me is disconnection
Mm,
and severance, because it was always there. It never left me. I just wouldn't connect with it.
mm,
And the reason I wouldn't connect with it is because writing is the truest thing that I've known about myself since I can remember remembering.
right.
And the context to that is that I have an incredible mother. I was mostly raised by her, a single mum who worked 3 jobs to keep us going, and somehow, in all of her own trauma and stress, had the capacity to teach me to read when I was 3 and to encourage my love of literacy and stories and books with absolute abandon. And so I grew up knowing that the only thing I was any good at, and by good, I mean the thing that lit me up, made me feel alive, made me feel like my brain was engaged with being conscious and aware and in my body and in and of the world, was writing. And so it's taken a number of years to also understand that the easiest way to deal with things in life that we find too hard to deal with was to sever myself from writing. Because through writing, I was closest to myself. I was with myself. I was right by my own side. But if I didn't write, I didn't have to face things that were unbearable and overwhelming and too much for me to process. I abandoned myself in order to cope. It wasn't ever fully conscious either, in the same way that a little bit like the neurological process of dissociating, when our brain sort of shuts down to protect itself from a trauma or from something that is too much to process. It's why we feel later like we have no clear memory of that experience. So it was a form, I think, of self-protection, but in a really imperfect way, because it was also an unwitting form of, I'll use this term loose, like self-harm. Writing was the best thing for me, but by not writing, my brain was okay protecting myself, but also harming myself because I lost my outlet for understanding self, life, ideas, exploring catharsis, anything like that. So writing The House That Joy Built, when you mentioned before, it's for writers, but I wanted to go broader. I wanted to talk about all those tiny little severances that can happen to our creative expression. So the book is not just for writers or artists, or it's for anyone that has ever loved an outlet for their imaginations, which we are all born with, and is, as far as we know, an extraordinary uniqueness of being human, that we can daydream and create and express ourselves through imaginative, emotional articulation. I wanted to write for anyone who has ever felt paper cuts and slamming doors, and even the sneakiest feeling of, I really used to love mosaicing. Why don't I do that anymore?
Right.
And exploring why we don't do those things anymore, because it is in the making and the crafting and the expressing of our imaginations that we are with our whole selves and find through the process what we need for resilience, what we need to stay open-hearted in an increasingly distressing world that is accessible in our pockets, harrowing, How do we stay open-hearted to ourselves and each other and our humanity? And we all have this act of connection through creative expression. So having experienced that severance myself, that's how I wanted to write The House That Joy Built. And what I wanted to offer was all the different types of fear that I have experienced, totally muting me and causing me to sever myself from myself and my imagination, and how I respond to those things, to offer any sort of, maybe this is a comfort to you too.
Right, right. And I think it's so interesting how, I mean, unfortunately, you are forcing me to be compassionate to some of these people who are causing such horrible harm in the world.
Very hard thing to do
right now. But when I think about that, there is even an overlap between these women asking you how you did it and these people who are acting in such hateful ways that maybe the same medicine could be given to both, and
I think
with a better
about
outcome.
that often myself too.
Yeah.
Yes. What to do with pain. All the different ways that pain can be transformed. It reminds me of that Richard Rohr quote, Father Richard Rohr, and he wrote and says, pain that is not transformed is transmitted.
That's brilliant. Wow, that's so true.
And are we not responsible with any modicum of privilege and capacity that we have to find ways to transform pain so we are not transmitters of it?
Wow.
Is that how we each explore not doing harm? And the extraordinary thing about having imaginations, which we are all born with, is that through creative thought and expression, we can honor joy and love and everything nourishing and meaning in our lives. We can lay flowers at the feet of the gifts that we have through our acts of creative expression. But how profound also that it is through our imaginations that we can find a home for homeless emotions like unrequited love, grief. We can give a home. We can create a home for the things that haunt us through our creativity that otherwise have nowhere to belong.
Yeah, that is so, that's fascinating. You're really making me consider some things. Sorry, my dog is just like,
I love dogs so much, Pam.
Did you hear the little click, click, click,
the
click,
little
click
claws
of the toenails? It's just
I live for that sound. We have 6 Australian Shepherds in our family. So the sounds of dog paws it's my happy place. I was actually thinking to myself, I hope that's a pup, because I feel like it's almost the perfect soundtrack. Dogs are our great gurus, right?
That is true. That is true. They are the saints that walk the earth. That is very true.
And none of my books, this was written with dogs at my feet. So there we are.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, so what I really love about your book is you have this whole little very, very personal toolkit to deal with things like your inner critic, self-doubt, and fear. I loved Can you tell the She-Ra story?
Oh, God, yes. So I don't know how, I don't want to offend anybody with a little bit of what I call foul-mouthed fairy language,
It's fine.
Pam, but I do think that well-placed swearing is a great act of creativity in and of itself. And so when I was writing The House That Joy Built, as I said earlier, I wanted to offer and share and name all of the things that have stopped me in my life, all of the different types of fear that have stopped me in my life, and not just leave it there, but offer the response. So if you think of the fear as the call, the sort of overwhelming, almost deafening call, what is my response? Offering that response. And that became what I call in the book my toolkit of unfuckable with magic, or HUM for short, which delighted me when I realized that was the shorthand, the acronym, because it's all comes from the gut, right? It's all gut led. And so one of the stories that I tell in exploring the toolkit is when I was a kid, and I was a kid in the 80s, and so I experienced the original She-Ra cartoon as it came out sort of live. And I mean, what's not to love? And what wasn't to love as a girl in the 80s, seeing a woman raise a sword and save men and transform herself and ride a horse with rainbow, I mean, it ticked every box. So I was a firm fan. And we're talking, I'm maybe 6 years old. And in Brisbane, north of the Gold Coast in Queensland, there's like I guess you would call it an annual like fairground, big carnival kind of show. We call it the Ekka. It's the Royal Show. And there's a public holiday. Everyone gets to go to it. And in the 80s, there were show bags, and everybody loved their show bags. We all saved up our pocket money for it. And so Mum and I went to the Ekka, and I got a She-Ra show bag. In the She-Ra show bag was a gold plastic sword with the She-Ra full face mask crown thing and the sort of gold plastic arm cuffs. I think I slept with them on. I slept with the sword beside me in bed. But I came to use them in a real world kind of way when I became at the same age conscious. This is my memory of becoming conscious of the awareness that when I was watching TV at nighttime before dinner in our living room, I became aware that if the lights in the living room were on and it was dark outside and the curtains were open, somebody could be outside in the dark and I could not see them if I was in the lit living room, but in the darkness, they could see me.
That is creepy.
And that creepiness, that sense of vulnerability, that's my memory of becoming aware for the first time. I didn't know this in this many words, obviously at the time being 6, but I became very aware of the ick sensation of feeling seen, but not knowing by who or what.
Mm.
And when I look back on that as an adult, it is absolutely the feeling of vulnerability. When we are in any situation where we do not feel emotionally safe and we don't know why or who or how we are being seen, perceived, that sort of thing. And so the vulnerability and the being seen go hand in hand together. So the way that I remedied this when I was 6, in this time of having the She-Ra show bag, is I got really pissed off with the feeling in my 6-year-old capacity. I didn't talk to anyone about it. I just remember me thinking, okay, how am I troubleshooting this? What are we going to do about it? Also, because 6 is the age, right, where you've sort of really, and I can do it myself, really practicing those vibes. So mum and I chuckle about this because, there was one night where she sort of left me in the lounge room with my snacks and my little juice box to watch TV before dinner. And the next time she checked on me, I'm sitting watching TV with my full face Shearer mask on, my plastic cuffs, and my sword raised by my side, because that is how I figured I would face the dark. And like I hissed. I remember like having all my stuff and hissing. And it has stuck to me, that memory, like a beautiful burr, because as adults, we find ways. What is the sword we are raising? How can we raise our sword so that the fear of being seen and the fear of the unknown does not stop us from sitting with our snack bowl and our juice box, watching the thing that brings us joy, also known as allowing ourselves to enjoy for pleasure and indulge in any activity that makes our brains feel creatively glorious and fed. So that is my Shearer, my lifelong Shearer love stems from there.
Well, it's so interesting. I do want to talk about the importance of landscape. You do talk a lot about that time in Manchester and your I love the little writing, the mobile home.
The caravan.
The caravan, that's right, the different vocabulary.
Frenchie.
The caravan.
Yeah, the different vocab, right? We call it a caravan in Australia.
We call it a caravan too sometimes here, but it's mostly, it doesn't matter. But anyway, the caravan and things like that. But what's interesting is that this book kind of goes seamlessly from these outer landscapes to something that you call your inner landscape. And I'm wondering if you could talk, what is the inner landscape?
Such a beautiful question. I think anybody that has ever loved a place, which is all of us, even those of us who grew up in urban areas, they're generally speaking is a natural place, a green place that we have interacted with and that holds our memories and stories for us. I was exceptionally lucky and privileged in many ways to grow up here on the Gold Coast in southeast Queensland, where I was surrounded by subtropical rainforest or in close proximity to the Pacific Ocean. Or when I was in neither of those places, I was in my mother's garden. She is a gardener. And so in the same way I knew about writing when I was 3, I have known the natural world from the same age. And that knowledge of the natural world has shaped me and I think informed how I think about story and memory and our relationship to where both of those things live in landscapes. When I was a kid, when I was 9, my family lived in a coffee and cream striped GMC van in North America for over a year.
Wow.
And we traveled from national park to national park up and down the west coast of North America. So as a child, away from the subtropics of the Gold Coast, I experienced Grand Teton National Park, Monument Valley in Utah, Yosemite. The list is endless, like the Okanagan, like it just, I experienced the natural world at a scale that I think irrevocably changed my mind at that age. And so what fascinates me always is that it is never deliberate to me when I sit down to write, to think about, and now how shall I write natural landscapes into this? It is kind of, it's just a pre-conscious part of my storytelling that I didn't even know about myself until I wrote The Lost Flowers of Alice Hart, which works so much with native Australian flora. But all of this experience in being in the cycles and rhythms of nature, even if, as I said, it's a green space, it's a park in an urban landscape, we are exposed to both the subliminal understanding that we are a species in nature no different to the oak or elm tree that we rely on seeing on our drive to work or our afternoon run. We are a species just like that tree, which is why seeing that tree makes us feel deeply connected, because we come from the same world. But also that we live in relationship, just keeping this example going, we live in relationship with that tree. That tree has watched us move into the neighborhood, grow our family, grieve someone that we've lost who's died, rage against someone who treated us like shit and broke up with us. We've run to the tree on our runs, on our bike rides. We've been there for a picnic with somebody that we shared a precious memory we will never have again. Our emotional inner lives are inseparably entwined with the places and the figures, if you like. By figure, I mean the tree, the bay of water, the lake, the river, the field of wildflowers, the range of mountains. Our experience of being alive and being emotionally feeling creatures are imprinted and held by the places where these lives that we live happen. And when we go back to those places, we return to ourselves. We return to the parts of ourselves that those places are ever holding for us. And our imagination is no different as a landscape inside of ourselves. And it is there, that inner world, where every single moment we have ever lived and has made us who we are, that is all held in a wild inner landscape of ourselves. And it is made of imagination and memory and pain and joy. And that's why when I was writing The House That Joy Built, I realized that as much as I was talking about our outer world, I'm talking about our inner country. And that just like we long for that place, that field, that tree, that cabin by the water, that annual trip we took with our family to Tahoe or Nevada or, Cape Cod or anywhere, we long for those places. As much as we long for them, we also long for what we have inside of ourselves. We long for it inside of ourselves. And the way that it feels to return to a place that holds our memory in the outer world is as emotional. Perhaps it's even more emotional to return to that place inside of ourselves. They are mirrors of each other and they are in relationship with each other.
That's so beautifully put. Again, I keep thinking about all the metaphors and symbols that you use in this book. One thing I really loved were the desert oak seed pods.
Oh, yes.
So what is they need something very special in order to germinate or to sprout. What is that?
So I had the great honor of living on Unanu land in the Western Desert of Australia for 4 years. And it is a semi-arid desert For anybody who isn't familiar and maybe hasn't had the extreme pleasure of visiting, the soil is red. It's iron ore rich soil. And the great illusion about it is that it's a desert where there is nothing, like Death Valley in the sense of vegetation. But being semi-arid, there are gullies of these spectacular, magnificent desert oak trees, which are a type of casuarina. And I loved them desperately while I lived there. They have needles instead of leaves, and their needles on their boughs, when a hot breeze blows through the desert or a cold breeze in the very cold winters, their susurration on the wind is truly like whispers. They're very evocative, very tactile. Their bark is furrowed and cork-like, which is a fire retardant sort of barrier, if you like. But I lived there and loved them with such great longing and passion, and didn't really know much about their propagation or how they grew until much later, which is that in the circular life of a desert oak, when their seed pod falls, the seed pods need fire to split open and to germinate and grow. Fire has to crack them open so that they can take root and grow. And then once that happens, as they grow, they stay very thin and skinny, as some of the Ananu ladies used to say to me in English. They stay really thin and skinny until their roots go deep enough to hit the water table under the ground. Once their roots hit the water table, then they get fat and happy, and they expand and become magnificent and flourish, and their boughs reach out and take up so much space, and they can live for hundreds and hundreds of years. And then again, before they can do that, they have to be opened by fire. So we come back to the beginning of the circle.
Right.
So they remain one of my favorite, most beloved trees, even though I'm a total tree tart and have like 4,000 favorites. But the desert oak have a very special place in my heart. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. I'm always thinking how incredibly brilliant trees are.
Mm-hmm. This is the thing about anything in nature. If we pay close enough attention, we will find that there is a recognition in the growth and propagation of flora and fauna that mirrors our psychological and emotional survival and ability to thrive and flourish. Not to mention our own physical cycles, because we are no separate, we are no different. But that is what writing has taught me about myself, that I did not know about myself until I started writing in that same circular fire, seed pod, water table kind of way. Is that in every book that I think I will write, I did not know how interconnected exploring my characters' inner worlds would be to how they perceive their outer natural world and what they learn about it, until I started writing and thinking, oh my God, where has this come from? It's like uncovering something about myself I was not consciously aware of. Was this knowledge that I have absorbed since I was a child, that if we pay close enough attention to anything in nature, it is mirroring our psychological and emotional survival, and where the keys are, and how we can embrace and accept that we are not on and productive robots all the time. We are cyclic creatures with seasons, and our mind and hearts are no different.
Well, again, I'm not going to try and turn this into a conversation about the lost flowers of Alice Hart, but I will say that the landscapes in this book are so important to her journey, and just like they're so different, and she's able to find this sort of inspiration and refuge in a lot of the things where she would have never expected that she could. So yeah, I completely believe you that is a huge part of your awareness. Maybe not when you first started writing, but that's something that, as you reflected on it, that was really important. I do want to ask about the house that Joy built. What is that house?
So, as we can probably all tell, I love a good metaphor. She loves a good metaphor, this one.
And yours are really good. Yours are really good.
Thank you. Thank you. Another thing I didn't know about myself until I started writing over a decade ago was how much I love a bloody good metaphor. Like, no idea about. And my sort of oldest and dearest friends are like, duh, you've been talking in metaphors for like 20 years. Like, welcome. I think the reason I love metaphors so much is because they are tiny stories. And I know for so many of us, we can access ideas with so much more freedom and accessibility through story than through statistics and facts and figures. At least that's my lived experience of speaking to many people and understanding that things will land for us all in a much more universal and fluid way if we can access them through story, because our brains are hardwired for storytelling.
Right.
So when I was writing The House That Joy Built, I was really conscious of not wanting to write a sort of how to bullet point, outcome, productivity, achieve book about creativity. I wanted to use everything that I had to tell a story about how we can embrace and use our innate stories to bring the joy that we want from creativity back into our lives, to come back to ourselves. And this taps into all of the core things that we long for: belonging, acceptance, connection, love, and a massive one that is kind of holding hands with belonging, but is its own as well, is a sense of home and safety, feeling safe, feeling like we are in the sanctuary of a home, whatever that means to us, feeling at home with ourselves rather than outcast, self-exiled, disconnected, banished from ourselves. So as I was writing, I think one of the greatest gifts of any art form, in my experience in writing in particular, is the more I write, the more the story exists, but the more I exist at the same time, the more I understand myself, the more I am created through the writing. And once I started writing The House That Joy Built, and in the introduction, I talk about our inner country, I then sort of was thinking about what sort of structure I wanted to give the process of returning to our inner country, how that feels. And this sort of all happened because ideas, as we all know, they so often do not wait their turn. They don't happen in order. They are not chronological or linear. Sometimes it is like a food fight. It is like paintballs coming at you. It's balls of twine are unraveling, and you are just in knots, in thousands of ideas, hundreds, dozens, like just many ideas all at once. And so as I was centering myself and writing around the idea of the inner country, a number of things were happening around this, which was I got the title for the book. I was doing the mundane task of like laundry, sorting the loads, folding them. And I got the idea of the title. It was a little bit of a first line of Alice Hart moment where I bent over to pick up a pillowcase. And as I stood up, it was the house that Joy built came together in my mind. And at the same time, swirling around it in this non-linear way, came this sort of slotting of pieces at the same time that I understood that the feeling of coming home to ourselves, the feeling of returning to our inner country after we've been disconnected or exiled for whatever reason from ourselves deep inside, is like that feeling of coming home from a long, hard, harrowing journey, to see as we return that someone has left the light on, the porch light on for us. And that person that left the light on for ourselves is a version of ourselves in time. It's another version of ourselves who was the last version of ourselves, perhaps, who was deeply connected to their inner country. We might have been a child at the time. Before I wrote Alice Hart, the last time I remember my inner country being tended and lush and embracing and a place of belonging where I had like my dream, like writer's retreat house, was when I was 14.
Wow.
And that 14-year-old girl left the light on for 34-year-old me. And she was there in a circle of time, like a circle of seasons, like the circle of a lifespan of a tree. She was there at 14 when I was 34, raging and sobbing and feeling like I wasn't good enough. And I picked up my pen and wrote that first line of Alice Hart. And I came home to the house that she had created. And the more that we create, and the more that we create for the sole reason of the fact that it brings us joy, and the power that that joy has to help us keep going and to keep thriving and to keep finding our humanity and to keep doing the best we can to make our life and the lives around us good and beautiful with what we have. It all comes back to the house inside of us on the inner country continues to build, and there is no scarcity, and there is enough for everyone to dwell there. But I understand too, and it's important to say, and I do say this at the beginning of this book, that to create can often be a privilege. It is the privilege of having time. It is the privilege of having the finances and the economical standing to be able to take time to create. It is so many different layers of privilege that go into being able to create. And it is not to suggest that all of the systemic reasons and damages and breakages that stop us for creating are on the individual to fix. It's more trying to speak to the idea that if we have any capacity to create, and fear is the thing that is stopping us, that we also are an equal force to meet that fear with, and to be able to give ourselves the joy that we need to notice and to allow both our inner country and the house we build there for ourselves of joy to flourish and to exist.
That is so beautiful. Well, before we say
you.
goodbye, first of all, if there ever create an Olympic sport of creating metaphors, you're going to take home all the gold. But you're right. It's like that. That's also visual. It's really, really does impact in a different way. But I do want you to tell people where they can find you if they want to follow your work.
Thank you.
I know that you often have many, pans in the fire, but what's the best way for them to follow you or to connect with you?
Thank you, Pam. That's lovely. And I take having a space online really seriously as a place for connection with readers. So it's highly unlikely you will ever see any photos of what I have eaten or which is no shade on anybody who loves to share photos of what they've eaten that day, because that is their joy. But for myself, I use my space online to talk about the tender, brave work that creativity requires, and wherever possible with a sense of humor so that we all stay sane and stay alive. So I have been writing a newsletter dispatch for about 15 years, and just recently have migrated, in the last 2 years, I've migrated it over to Substack. So people can find me there, and I can give you links and all of that sort of thing if you have transcripts and stuff, so people can click on the links.
I do. I have transcripts and show notes.
And show notes. My God, we've got everything. So everything, all the bells and whistles. So I'm on Substack, and that's where writing to connect is where I like to invest most of my time. I'm also on Instagram. And so between those two places, I focus on the Substack because it allows me to write rather than to get caught in the furnace of the Instagram algorithm, tool though for connectivity as it still is. But something that I love to do, I've been offline actually since December. I've just finished writing my third novel. So I just finished it a week ago. So I've just finished. It's called The World Beneath Her Feet. So I've really gone into the underground metaphor. We will all be shocked. She's gone into metaphor, everyone. But so I've been off Substack for a few months to focus on letting the story live through me, and to just be very single-minded, to meet deadline largely. But I'm coming back online now, and I'm drafting my first newsletter, all of which is to say that something I love to engage with on through my newsletters is I welcome readers to write any question that they might have to me, and then I answer them in free to read posts. So that, because so many of our questions all of our questions are unique and personal to us. And I think it's always shocking for us to realize how universal they are as well, how much we all benefit from being reminded that we are not the solo freaks we think we are, with our questions about creating and art and vulnerability, and how hard it can be, even though it's the thing that we love to do the most, that sort of thing. So that's where I invest my time online, where and how. And that's where people can find me. Yeah.
Well, that's wonderful. And I'm so glad that you came on the show to talk about this book.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes,
for having me.
I'm so happy to have such I was going to use the word bingeable author, but that's mixing my metaphors with viewing and reading. So I don't know what the right word is for reading, but definitely your work is something that people will not be able to put down.
Oh, that's really kind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I haven't been able to in any case. So
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Holly. And
thank you for your time, and thank you anybody who's made it to the end and listened along with us and has absorbed all the metaphors.
That's right. That's right.
That's it. May we all be desert oak seed pods today.
Ah, wonderful. Thank you. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Thank you so much to Holly Ringland for being on the show today to talk about her book, The House That Joy Built. She is a delight to talk to, and her books are the kind that you just don't want them to ever end. She's just finished her third novel, The World Beneath Her Feet. I'll put links up in the show notes so that you can connect with Holly on Substack and follow her work. Thanks to all of you for listening today. I'm not using social media right now, but you can always reach me through my website, arthealsallwoundspodcast.com. You can also find me on Substack, where I post more info about the episodes on the show. The music you've heard in this podcast is by Ketsa, Lobo Loco, and Barbara Higbee.